Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about some horror novels that I would highly recommend for the Halloween season, and admittedly I don't think any of these are necessarily Halloween specific or October specific, but I do think they are creepy and spooky and excellent and would be perfect for the spooky season. Basically, I'm just jumping on the Halloween recommendations as a way to talk about some brilliant horror novels that I think are a bit lesser known. There are definitely some hidden gems here. I know this time of year more people are looking for horror recommendations, and if that is you, then hello and welcome. I talk about horror fiction here all year round, and I wanted to recommend a bunch of books here that I have read and loved. So if you're looking beyond Stephen King and the like, nothing wrong with King, he's great, but there's so much more to horror, and I wanted to recommend some other options in this video. I have picked 10 books to recommend. Most of these, in fact all but one of them, are from my favourite era of horror, which is the 1970s, 80s and 90s, but I realised that not everyone likes physically old books and having to track down second-hand books, so fear not, because most of these, again all but one, are available in either a more recent physical book edition. Some are also available as Kindle editions, and there are also a couple available as audiobooks, so you should easily be able to get your hands on copies of these. Okay, just a little bit more ramble before I finally get to talking about the books, but yeah, I'll just talk about these briefly, and if I already have separate review videos for any of these titles, I will leave links to them, so if you want to hear more about them you can check them out. But first up we have Black Ambrosia by Elizabeth Engstrom. This is a vampire novel, but it is a vampire novel with a difference. This one is really dark and really quite messed up, and it's about a woman who is a vampire who is travelling from place to place and doing vampire things, but the unique element of this story is that, is she really a vampire, or is it all in her head? Does she just believe that she's a vampire? So I thought that was a really unique and interesting twist on the classic vampire subgenre, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. Next up is Deliver Us from Evil by Alan Lee Harris. This is about a teenage boy who is an orphan and is adopted by someone in this small town with a dark secret, and as the story goes on we find out why he is there. This one has a bunch of really interesting characters in this small town, and the dark secret going on here is definitely dark. There is also something called the Snake Well, which, yes, is definitely as terrifying as it sounds. This book had so many genuinely creepy moments that, yeah, really got under my skin and I thought were super effective. It also has a bit of a coming of age element, which is really well done, and it has some really great emotion to the story too. Next up is Crota by Owl Goingback. This is essentially a creature feature. This book starts off with a double homicide and the local sheriff looking into what happened, and these bodies have been seriously mauled by something, and at first they think it must have been a bear attack, but it wasn't a bear, let's just say that. So we're following the sheriff and a few other characters as more horrific incidents occur in this area, and this book also has an element of Native American folklore and includes some Native American characters, which I really enjoyed. It's an absolute ton of fun, really fast-paced and action-packed and bloody, and also has some heart and emotion too. Okay, next up is Cold Moon Over Babylon by Michael McDowell. This is a Southern Gothic tale of supernatural revenge. It's set in a small town and is focused on a family of a grandmother and 2 teenage grandchildren. Something awful happens to the young girl, and this sets off a chain of events which involves a bunch of super creepy, supernatural goings on. This small town is filled with interesting characters and dark secrets, and this was just an absolutely wonderful and super compelling read. Next up is Now You're One of Us by Asa Nonami. This is set in Japan, and it's about a woman who marries into a family, and she soon starts to suspect that there's something strange going on behind this very happy and welcoming exterior. And let's just say she's not wrong. This felt like a really great mix of gothic horror but in a contemporary setting, and psychological horror. There's a lot of atmosphere here and that feeling of dread throughout the book, and it definitely goes in a direction I was not expecting. Next is The Gatherer by Owen Brookes. This is the one on the list that I don't believe there is a recent physical edition of, or a Kindle version, so if you are interested in this one, it looks like right now you might have to track down a second-hand copy, but if you're into scarecrows, then this would be worth tracking down. This is about a woman who is having an affair with a married man, and he inherits a house in a small village in the countryside and decides that she can move into it and he will come visit her on the weekends, and she gets settled in but soon realises that there are some strange local folk in this village and they have some rather sinister traditions. So it definitely has some folk horror vibes, and there are scarecrows, really creepy scarecrows. Next is The Cormorant by Stephen Gregory. This is about a man who inherits a house in Wales from his uncle who passed away, and he and his wife and their young son move into the house, but under the condition that they also take care of the uncle's pet cormorant. Yes, the giant seabird. This is definitely more at the literary end of horror, and it's extremely well written, so much atmosphere, and some truly unsettling and disturbing things that occur in this pretty slim book. It's not your typical horror novel, so if you're looking for something different, then this is a great one. Next up is The Red Tree by Caitlin R. Kiernan. This is the one on the list that is not vintage. This one is a bit more recent, and I think it was originally published in 2009. This is about a writer who moves to this old house in the middle of nowhere in order to focus on her writing, and while she's there she uncovers a manuscript written by someone who previously stayed in the house. So it has that really interesting element of like a story within a story. There is an old oak tree near the property that is surrounded by local legend, and it seems that this previous tenant of the house was obsessed with the tree, and our protagonist here also becomes obsessed with it. This novel is a really interesting mix of weird with a capital W horror, also psychological horror, some folk horror, some Lovecraftian horror, just all the kinds of horror thrown in here. It seems like a lot, but it works perfectly. This book also features lesbian relationships within the story, and please don't be put off by this paranormal romance looking cover, because it really doesn't do this book any justice. Okay, we're on to the last two. Next up is Phantom by Thomas Tessier. This is about a young boy who still believes in things that go bump in the night, and when he and his parents move to a small coastal town, things really ramp up and he is convinced that there's something evil out to get him. This one definitely has some Stephen King's It vibes, so if you are looking for something a little like that, then I definitely recommend this one, although in this one it's just one boy rather than a group of kids, and this one actually came out a few years before It did. This one is a really great slow burn of a story, and it is creepy and emotional as well. And it also has a scarecrow in the story, hence the cover. It's not as big a part of the story as The Gatherer is, but there's a scarecrow nonetheless. And last but not least is Sweetheart, Sweetheart by Bernard Taylor. And I know this is definitely one I've talked about a bit on my channel before, but I don't think I've mentioned it recently, so it's definitely time to recommend it again. This is a really fantastic ghost story. It's a really unique ghost story, and it's about a man who travels to visit his twin brother and his brother's wife, and he ends up staying in their small cottage in the countryside and uncovers a bit of a mystery there and some supernatural goings on. This one is really beautifully written, it's really atmospheric, has some good creepiness to it, and I can't recommend this one highly enough. So there you have it. Those were 10 horror recommendations for the Halloween season, or any time of year. I would love to hear if you've already read any of these, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or if you decide to pick any of these up on my recommendation, I would love to hear your thoughts once you've read them. I hope you all have a wonderful spooky season and a fantastic Halloween. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!